This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, and I am your host for this week's episode, Paul J. Slee. I'm filling in for Mike Rapin, who is on an amazing backpacking adventure through the Savage Land. So stay safe, Mike. He'll be back soon to fill us in on all that. So, but of course, I'm not alone. I enlisted two half-inflated beach balls rolling down a deserted island beach. Kait Lamphere.
Hello.
And Kait Scotchless.
Hello.
Welcome, Kate. It's good to have you on the show. I swear we'll figure something out to make sure listeners know which Kate I'm referring to. But
which beach ball?
I think, yeah, exactly. But no, we are here to talk about comics we read. Might go a little deep into some stuff we've read recently, but kind of just a free-flowing conversation for this week's episode. I'm excited to do that because I've read some really interesting stuff. But of course, as the guest host, I am obligated by the Galactic Podcast Charter to ask two questions of my guests. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with Kait Lamphere.
I've been good. It's been really hot up here in Michigan for the last couple of days, which I do not love, but I have been growing some vegetables, and my tomatoes and zucchinis do love it. So at least I'm getting some like quote unquote free vegetables out of this insane heat. I have most recently read My Brother's Husband, volumes 1 and 2, which is the complete series. There's only two collected volumes. And this is by Tengora Tagame. This is a manga. And as a quick summary, there's a character named Yaichi who is a single father raising his young daughter Kana. I think she's like 5. They get a visitor from Canada who is Mike, who is the husband of Yaichi's twin brother who recently died and who Yaichi hasn't spoken to in like multiple years. Like they just kind of like quietly fell out. And the story is from his point of view. And like he's at first uncomfortable with a gay man at home, but quickly starts to like confront all of his negative assumptions that his society has told him to believe. And then Mike and Yaichi learn about Yaichi's brother more from one another, like adulthood versus childhood. But then like I'm kind of making this sound sad, but it's actually a very happy, wholesome story because throughout all of this, you have Kana, who is like a very like active, excited, happy girl, and she like loves Mike immediately, which is one of the things that makes Yaichi go, hang on, like maybe this guy is not so bad.
Okay.
And the story details and like confronts the social difficulties of being gay in Japan, which it's still behind America, at least in terms of progressiveness in that way. And while Yaichi is like thoughtful and reflects on his own assumptions, there are like some adults in his community who are not that way, and he has to like figure out how to respond. And like throughout the series, he responds in different ways, and like by the last time we see him respond to somebody like that, it was like really well done. Like good job Yaichi. And I really like, in terms of like a piece of like comic art, I really like the way that the people are drawn in this manga, because so often in manga you've got these like big eyes and like out of proportion, like really skinny people, or like the hair is wild. But this manga, it's actually like pretty realistic. I mean, like it's still comic art, but it's like the proportions are more correct. And I really appreciate how like, especially the character of Mike is portrayed. Like he's like just like a big American man. Like he's like tall and he's like muscular and everything without being.
I like that.
It's just
big
a big
American
guy.
man.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like an American dad. I don't know. Like he's just a regular guy. But like, I mean, especially because like this is a Japanese manga, and like nothing is like out of proportion. Again, like he's just kind of a muscular, hardworking, hairy Canadian man.
I've been on TikTok too long, and as soon as you're like, he's just a guy, I'm like, hit him with your car.
Oh, no, Mike. But yes, so realistic body types. I really liked just the way that these characters are portrayed and how like reflective Yaichi is and everything. But there's also like this really small part of it that I could have easily missed, which is when Mike talks about like the aspects of Japanese culture, and like how he finds like the food, like when he and his husband would go out to eat, or like when his husband was trying to like introduce him to Japanese cuisine, like that exists in Canada. Like you can get those things, but they're all like
Mhm.
slightly different, or like they put different toppings on like their sushi, and things
Right.
like that, or like they use different kinds of fish. So just like this kind of like, yes, Japanese culture is available across the ocean, but like there are these small differences, and like the comic kind of addresses those. And that was like,
Mhm.
as a person who likes to occasionally try food from different places, it's like, okay, it's not actually like the real deal. I've got to just go to Japan and get some sushi.
I guess so. Yeah.
But yeah, so My Brother's Husband, volume 1 and 2, really enjoyed it.
That sounds interesting. Like, yeah, I think, I'm slowly trying to open my horizons to manga, but sort of a slice of life manga like this kind of sounds more appealing than, some more off the wall stuff I've heard talked about on the show. So,
Mhm.
what about you, Kate Scotchless? What did you read this week? Do you want to talk about?
I did something wild and crazy. I checked out from my library a DC book
Mm.
called Strange Adventures, a little title you may not have heard of.
Yeah.
It
What,
was
what is this
written
now?
by Tom King, illustrated by Mitch Gerards, and Doc Shaner, and lettering by Clayton Cowles.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, this book was so good. Was I confused enough to have to message the IRCB team and be like, who is this guy? Here's a picture so that I could do some Wikipediaing? Yes, but it was all worth it. So this book is about Adam Strange, a character I knew nothing about before this, coming to terms with his actions during the war on Ron.
Mhm.
Where was he heroic? Were his actions actually more disgraceful? He has come back and been celebrated and has a book come out, but then there's questions and controversy, and he ends up asking Batman to investigate him to basically prove him the hero he believes himself to be. But then Batman hands this off to Mr. Terrific, another person I had never heard of, uh,
Right.
who then goes about this and finds out that it's actually not that black and white, because war
Yeah.
is messy and ethics aren't as easy as one would hope, especially when it comes to warfare. And so this is another book of Tom King's talking about the complexity and gray areas of war, which I have yet to find a book of his on this theme that I don't love. He
Right.
does it
Right.
so well, and so um, it's just very thoughtful and contemplative and interesting in that way. And
Mhm.
I had the ultimate reading hangover when I finished this book because it's just so good. It's a maxi series, so like when you're done, you're done.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's but the art is gorgeous and the writing is perfect, and I cannot recommend this one enough to even the non DC fans out there, because I'm not a DC girl.
Right. And I think what's really interesting to me is like Tom King's able to do stories that have some like pretty deep, obscure DC characters and make them appeal to
Yeah,
like any type of reader. Like you don't need to know much about Mr. Terrific. He gives you enough to understand like he's basically the smartest person on earth, right? That's all I
yeah.
kind of need to know. And even Batman trusts him, which is, kind of important. So, and I love the way that this book used the two different artists. You get all the flashbacks on Ron are done by Evan Shaner, whose work is like very clean, sort of like a Silver Age influence to a lot of it. And then like you get the Mitch Gerards, which is like the more contemporary part of the story. It's a little bit blurry, it's out of focus, it's a little dirty. Like the way you're able to use those two art styles narratively is really fascinating to me.
I thank you for bringing that up. I should have mentioned that. Yes, that is such such a well done part of the art of this book, is how they use that to depict past and present really seamlessly, so it's
Yeah.
easy to follow without having to be kind of continually pointed out by the creator, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great book. You're making me want to go back and reread it because I was reading it as it was coming out, and of course, reading books like this month to month can be a little. It's a very different experience than reading it in one sitting. So
You
I'd
should.
be very
You
curious to go back
absolutely
and reread
should.
it. Oh, well, thank you. I will. So, um, as for me, I know as Kate mentioned earlier, the weather here in Michigan has been incredibly hot. West Michigan weather watch. We had 90-degree days last week. I made it to the beach, which was very nice. The thing is, it could be 90 degrees. Lake Michigan is still about 50. So I made it about up to my shins and said, that's enough. And then got right out.
Yep.
So I try to make the most of, these Michigan summers when I can, though. So I was glad to get out there. As for comics, I read something really interesting. I picked up from Fantagraphics when they're having their big sale recently. It's the book Ephemera, written and illustrated by Brianna Lowenson, and this is her debut graphic novel. It's published by Fantagraphics, as I said earlier this year, and it's billed as a memoir. So it's autobiographical, but it's what's really interesting, and I don't know how to talk about it because it's a book that kind of defies explanation in a way. It's basically a memoir where Lowenson, who I'm assuming is kind of like the main character, they're remembering their childhood and all of their memories about their mother. The thing is, their mother was absent, either emotionally or physically, throughout most of their childhood. So how do you tell a memoir or a story about someone who's not there? And that's what kind of makes the book really interesting. And there's not a lot of dialogue. It's very sparse. The story's, simple, and you kind of piece it together yourself. But what's beautiful is the way Lowenson uses the artwork to kind of do that and to kind of illustrate the difference between a memory that the character's having and then the real life that she's, in right now, as these memories are being triggered by her going back to her mother's house. I want to say that, even though the story is not explicit about what their mother was dealing with, because, the mother is absent, she disappears for long periods of time. She's clearly emotionally distant, dealing with depression. I read it that she had an illness that I read as cancer. So I want to put that as a possible trigger warning or content warning, but it's not explicit in the story. It can be interpreted different ways, I think. But I think that's what makes the story really work, is you putting it together, the memories together, as the character the memoir is about is remembering it. And there's a whole scene where Lowenson's main character goes back to an abandoned greenhouse that their mother worked in or spent time in, and she's slowly bringing these plants back to life. And there's periods of the story where it's just her explaining, well, these flowers need sunshine, but these flowers don't. These flowers need a lot of water. And it's almost making a metaphor, an analogy between nurturing plants and motherhood or father or parenthood. It's really beautifully done. And what stands out and makes the book really more sort of engaging is the artwork, because Lowenson's artwork, very thin and elegant line work for all the characters and the foregrounds, but the backgrounds are all done in this watercolor type style. And it's very subtle watercolor using a very muted color palette early on, muted grays and blues. And then as the story fills in, we get more of Lowenson as an adult now reflecting back. It becomes more red and orange and sort of using the color to explain where they are in time, where they are in her memory, and her relationship to her mother. So again, it's a book that I can say all this, but you kind of have to just see it to make it work, because it's, again, there's a story there, but it is told very poetically and quietly throughout the book. It's really beautiful. I'm glad I picked it up. And I think it's a debut graphic novel, and it's a very distinct voice, a very different kind of art style than I usually read or see in comics. And yeah, I'm really curious to see what Lowenson does after this. So definitely one of the best books I've read so far this year that's come out. Highly recommend Ephemera by Brianna Lowenson.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, if you get a chance to look up the artwork, I mean, again, it's such a lovely book. Even just to pick up and flip through it, after I read it, I spent time just going over each page, kind of admiring the artwork and style. So
with getting into gardening, I've also been reading more books, ecology books somehow.
Okay. Yeah.
Did not expect to get into that genre ever.
Fair
but
enough.
yeah, even just looking at the cover of this, it looks very kind of nature centered.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned
lovely
the
book,
greenhouse. So.
Yep. Highly recommended. Anything else you've been reading, Kait Lamphere?
I have been reading How to Understand Israel in 30 Days or Less by Sarah Glidden. I'm not done with this, so I feel like maybe I shouldn't be this is what I read this week. But
Right.
I want to, I'm only halfway through it maybe, and I already feel like I need to talk about this. And I'm taking my time with this book, since it's kind of it's a mix of a travelogue and this self-reflective journey by the creator, but it's also this extensive history lesson in the history and of the people of Israel and Palestine and that whole region. And it is complex. There's a lot of history to that area, which I kind of knew going in. I knew that it was kind of this.
Right.
I can't really avoid knowing about this,
Right.
but like
there's conflict.
yeah,
What?
crazy. This is the first I'm hearing of it. No, kidding. But I haven't really like researched on my own or like really read a journey like this, like a first person narrative at all. I just kind of like see what's on the news.
Mhm.
And I feel like the creator's intention of going on this trip to Israel seemed to be to determine like which side of the Israel versus Palestine conflict was like quote unquote correct, but then like everything
Right.
that she learns is just like, oh, this is like just a huge gray area and everyone who lives here has their own story, and it makes one side or the other look better or worse, or you know,
Mhm.
roughly equal, or like she's got all these different experiences, she talks to all of these different people, and it's just a difficult issue all around, really. And I'm just learning so much from reading this book, and like seeing Glidden's thoughts on all of this is like another step of like me like learning about this, and it's giving me like insight about this issue, I guess, especially because like she has like heritage ties to the area, like her family was originally from there like way back when.
Okay.
So she's coming at this from like this American point of view, like she's only ever lived in America herself, but she's got this extra attachment to the location that she's going in with, and she's got a lot of thoughts about it, and it's taken a while to read. Like I don't want to rush through this, so
Yeah.
that's how to understand Israel in 60 days, in 30 days or less. But it might
Yeah. I
take
mean,
me
I've
60 to
read,
read it.
I read another book by Sarah Glidden, the Rolling Blackouts book, which is about the refugee crisis in Syria, in Iran, in Iraq. And like that book is really about journalism and how journalists can cover that objectively, if that's even possible. And I think
Yeah.
Glidden brings a sort of journalistic approach to everything that she does. And like, so a book like this makes sense to be very dense and complex,
Yeah.
but trying to explain it that way. I think she's a really fantastic cartoonist, but yeah, those books are heavy because there's so much information in them.
This one really isn't even that long by page count. I feel like I don't know if it was one of her books or another book about a conflict like this, but or a conflict in the world rather. But yeah, this one, I mean, just by page count, it's not that long, but there's a lot of information on every page, so I'm taking my time.
Nice. I'll have to read that. Yeah, like I said, I read her other book, Rolling Blackouts, and loved it. So this is on my list for a while. So I'll have to pick it up. All right. Kait, Scotchless. Anything else you want to mention that you've read recently?
Just a quick shout out to Lo and Behold from Wendy Mass, with art by Gabby Mendez. So this is a new middle grade OGN that came out like last month. I'm pretty sure I beat all the other children to the library holds list when this was pre-released.
Okay.
So that I got it first for my library before they got their grubby little hands on it. Because I was excited. So like all the points for having a middle grade graphic novel about a girl in STEM, obviously a thing I care a lot about. I just did a whole like hybrid model conference on promoting diversity in STEM and stuff like that. But so it's a pet project. But this is following a 12-year-old girl whose father is a computer science researcher, and he goes with her to another university for the summer, where he's going to work with a couple grad students on virtual reality research, and is really jazzed. But he becomes very much the absent figure, like parent. He's like too obsessed with his work, and so she's left with a lot of free time and makes friends with, again, more CUDA points, a little boy who's a person of color, which again you don't see that much of in these like very STEM forward books, who's also super into computer stuff. And the two of them essentially learn about artificial reality, and start to learn how it can, from these grad students, how it can make people see the world in new ways and how it can help humanity. Obviously, Wendy Mass has a very enthusiastic approach to AR and what it can do, and like sees it as a very good thing. There's definitely no complexity in how it's presented here, but this is a book targeted to like the 8 to 12-year-old crowd.
Right. Okay.
And then they go on to come up with ways of their own that they want to use this to help others and their other kids in their community. and kind of come up with a project, and the grad students help them put it together. And it's a lot of fun and very sweet and all about using computer science for good. And it pulled all my heartstrings and pushed the right buttons for me. I It's one of those books that I was just like, can we just pass this out to all the
Mhm.
little children of a certain age?
Sure.
Content warnings for parent substance abuse and childhood cancer, but like the
Okay.
lightest of content warnings because they're presented in a very appropriate way for 8-year-olds.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we are not talking gory detail or
Mhm.
any, I mean, it's the lightest of touching on those subjects.
Gotcha.
So it's a very nice, clean artwork by Gabby Mendez that I want to say doesn't really add to the story so much, but it is a credit to the artist that the art doesn't take away from a story when you're talking about virtual reality, because that is
Okay.
so hard to depict in 2D art
Right.
and make it feel like, oh yeah, your characters are entering this really cool alternate dimension 3D world when they put on their headsets.
Mhm.
So I thought that they did a good job. Again,
Interesting.
that's Lo and Behold by Wendy Mass and Gabby Mendez.
Yeah, and get to your library before the kids find it. So,
That's
right.
right. That's
Read it
right.
first. Oh, that sounds great. As for me, I finally sat down and read the new issue of Love and Rockets. That's Love and Rockets number 13, volume 4 of this book, of course, by Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez. And if you haven't listened yet, go check out the episode I did with our friend Zach at the Comics That We Love podcast. Me and him did a whole episode about Jaime Hernandez's Love and Rocket stories. It's a great conversation. So if you want to hear me talk even more about one of my favorite comics, head over there to check that out. So it was actually kind of fun to go back and reread a bunch of that stuff for that podcast. So I read a bunch of the older Maggie stories about Maggie that Jaime Hernandez did over the years, and to finally get the new issue. And again, one thing that makes Love and Rockets my favorite comic is the fact that if you read the earliest story, Maggie, the main character, is presented to be like 17 or 18 years old. The story progresses in real time. So 40 years later, here she is almost 60 years old. But it's still the same character. You know, you've gone through everything with her. You've seen her grow and change. In this issue, there's a moment when she goes to like the hairstylist and she's got longer hair than usual. So they cut it short. It's like, well, I've done that look before. Let's go even shorter. So it's a new haircut for Maggie. Feels like a big change. So little details like that remind you just how long you've been reading these characters and how involved with their lives you are if you read all this stuff. It's a fun little story. You know, her partner Ray is out of town, so Maggie kind of spends a day hiking with some teenagers that were art students of Ray's because he's an art teacher. And what's interesting is almost like Jaime is kind of shifting the story to these younger characters. And like Maggie's almost like a maternal figure to them since her and Ray don't have kids. She becomes kind of like the cool aunt to these like local teenagers. And it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic of her personality because you never really saw that before, her as like a maternal figure. And again, what's beautiful is that you've seen that character grow and change. One thing I did notice too as I was reading that, Jaime's artwork has gone even more cartoony in the past couple years. Like it's funny when you read Love and Rockets and then you read that his biggest influences are Dennis the Menace and Archie comics, and that's all you start seeing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's like I feel like he's leaned into it even more. There's a lot of like really expressive body language, exaggerated facial expressions. Like it's very funny and it's kind of cool to see him kind of just push that even further, given that his artwork has always been so a little bit more realistic in a way. Even though it's very simple artwork, it's been more true to life. And here's like cutting loose a little bit. Speaking of which, this current volume of Love and Rockets, I'm only talking about the Jaime stuff because that's kind of stuff I like more. The Gilbert stuff in this issue is good, but what I liked about the Jaime stuff is that there's a story he's been doing in this volume that's not Maggie related. It's kind of separate from his main Love and Rockets Loca's stories. And it's almost like a mix of like sci-fi and jungle B movie tropes. It's called Animus, and it follows this like evil space queen who lands on this planet and demands all the residents on the planet like worship her as like a space god. And like there's these like other space princesses that have powers that are trying to overthrow her. It's over the top and it's zany, and it's kind of fun to see him do something like that is like not grounded in the sort of realistic story of Maggie and her friends. It's very different. And you can tell this Jaime just loves sci-fi stories. He can kind of do a big story like this. So I couldn't tell exactly what's happening in each installment of the Animus story, but I just kind of fun to see him do something different. So here we are 40 years later, and it's still the best comic being made. So that's a tribute to how much I love Love and Rockets. So I was glad to finally sit down and read the newest issue.
I did listen to the episode that you were on for the comics that we love also, and that was a good time. So listeners, if you want to hear more, go check that out.
Yes, and I highly recommend jumping into Love and Rockets. It's a 40 years of worth of comics, but man, it's easy to breeze right through them and read them in big chunks. So
when was the last time that you did like a complete reread?
Well, that's interesting. Because the way that Fantagraphics has kept all that stuff in publication, all of the trades, the paperbacks are always collected by our author. So it's like you can read just the Jaime stuff or just the Gilbert stuff. When I bought that giant box set that came out last year, this like it must weigh at least 70 pounds, this giant like hardcover box where they published the first 50 issues of Love and Rockets. They published it in the original format, so you'd get like 6 pages of Jaime, 6 pages of Gilbert. So going back, I'm going to go back and reread it that way as it was originally published. So I'm just starting that now. So the current reread is underway.
All right, keep us up to date.
For sure. It's very different to read it in the way it was published because it's basically a 2-person anthology and they're each telling separate stories. To kind of get little snippets of each side by side is a very different reading experience. So
yeah, I bet.
There you go. Even if you've read it all, you can always go back and read it again. That's why it's the best. So yeah, those are the comics in the past. Let's talk about future comics we're excited to read this upcoming week. Let's start with you. Go back to Kait Lamphere. What are you excited for this week?
Yeah, so I'm excited for Nights with the Cat. This is a manga, surprise, by Kuru Z. And the last time I was on the podcast, I was on with Nick talking about manga, and he absolutely insisted that I read this book. So I was like, all right, fine, Nick, whatever. And then I put a hold on it, and it's here. But this is a slice of life story about a guy who just like gets home in the evenings and spends time with his cat, and that's what the book is about. And I think that this character and I are going to have a lot in common because I also enjoy spending my evenings with a cat. So we're basically the same person.
Relatable. Okay, yeah. Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, so Nick, if you're listening, I'm going to do it. I'm going to read this book. You told me to, so I'm doing my homework.
Giving into peer pressure.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah. I mean, Nick, yeah, again, the best thing about doing the show is getting recommendations from other people and stuff that maybe would not have heard about. So this actually sounds good. As I said earlier, I think the slice of life, smaller scale manga is kind of more appealing to me. So might have to check this out too.
Yeah, this does look very cute. It looks like a quick read because like I flipped through it a little bit and there's not a whole lot of dialogue. It's mostly like cute illustrations of this cat. So it'll be quick and adorable. A good palate cleanser maybe after the Sarah Glidden book.
Yeah. You need something to reset everything. So
yeah.
What about you, Kait? What's next on your pile?
Well, you already picked DC Pride when I got to our planning sheet. So the follow-up is Swim Team by Johnny Christmas, which you're not going to believe this, is a middle grade OGN. It came out a year ago, which means that I was just finally able to get it away from all the little children at the local library. It's about a main character, Bree, who is a little African-American girl. She moves to Florida with her dad, who's starting a new job and training program. And that means that she's starting at a new school. And it's named after Enith Brigatha, the first Black swimmer to earn an Olympic medal.
Okay.
And Bree ends up very much against her wishes in swimming class because all the other electives are already full when she transfers in. And she doesn't know how to swim and is very embarrassed about it and has a lot of anxiety about it, is really afraid of the pool. And This is about her kind of overcoming that fear and anxiety and also learning or being taught, and thus the reader being taught in the process, the history of the racist stereotype about African Americans being unable to swim and kind of how that all came about through segregation. And it does include, trigger warning, depictions of some of the really awful racist attacks on people using swimming pools during the segregation movement and protests and stuff like that. So, but again, at a middle grade level, And but anyway, I'm really excited for this. Full disclosure, I did start it last night because I
Oh,
didn't have
okay.
anything else on my book stand. So I'm only a little ways in, but it's so good so far. And I really can't wait to read the rest of this.
Nice.
And I have it from good authorities, like a one Kate Lamphere, that it is a good read. So
There you go. That sounds interesting.
how about you, Paul?
Well, you already kind of spoiled it. But before I get to my pick, we do have some people here in the chat with us. We're listening live on Discord. So Danny is going to be reading Batman number 136. I'll probably be reading that too, pretty close to the top of my pile, obviously. Hugh is excited for X-Men Before the Fall, Mutant First Strike number 1. Oof, that's quite a tongue twister of a title there. And then Paul G is going to be reading Foul Brood numbers 3 and 4. That looks like a Kickstarter comic they backed. So as for me, I did pick up the DC Pride 2023 collection. You know, DC's been doing this past couple years. Every June, publish a little anthology highlighting LGBTQ plus characters and creators. And I was kind of thinking like, they usually put them up on Hoopla at some point. So like, I'll just wait and, read it down the road. And then I saw it at the stand of the comic shop, picked it up and noticed the first story in it was written by Grant Morrison. And illustrated by Hayden Sherman. It's like, oh, well, I should probably pick this up because it's probably, as far as I know, Morrison's last work for DC. I think they, at this point, pretty much stopped writing for DC, gone on to do create their own projects. And it's a Green Lantern story. And I actually really liked Morrison's Green Lantern run that they did a couple years ago. So, and I really like the artwork too. I mean, Sherman's artwork does remind me of Chris Burnham and Frank Quitely. And so that kind of art style works with Grant Morrison's stories really well. So admittedly, that's why I picked it up. But I'm always like to support these kind of projects. I like that DC's been doing this. And they usually have a good lineup of creators whose work I'm not really that familiar with. Either they don't always do big two comics or, they're just kind of getting started, a little bit newer and highlighting characters I don't see very often. So I like to support these kind of projects. And obviously it's Pride Month, so that's a good excuse to kind of pick it up and, support it that way. So, and obviously, Kate, you were excited to pick it up too. Did you actually pick up a copy?
No, I need to go to my local shop still. I am going down there, I think, Monday.
Okay, nice. I can just picture you going to the shop and just like walking by the kids section, just elbowing the kids out of the way. Like, let me at those
Yep.
middle grade books.
It's convenient. Their faces are like right at elbow level, so you just wham, wham. No.
Not that we endorse violence in any form, but still, it's no.
No, you see, my problem is a good friend is a K through 12 librarian whose favorite genre is middle grade. And so I get just all the really solid middle grade recs from her. And she does not miss. So I listen.
Well, perfect. So, and then you tell us about them, then I got to go track them down. So that's how it goes. Yeah.
Sometimes you just need feel good books.
Totally agree. Speaking of which, we're going to take a quick break and come back about a book that is not a feel-good book. So we'll be back shortly. We want to talk a little bit about Nice House on the Lake. So we'll probably a little spoiler conversation after the break about that. So back shortly. Welcome back to the episode. As we were talking about what to talk about for this episode, we kind of like started off thinking about just doing a no topic, talking about what we've read. But then one of the Kates mentioned that they had just finished reading Nice House on the Lake, which is one of my favorite comics from last year. So I thought it'd be nice to maybe do a little discussion about that, maybe some minor spoilers, but that is a book that I think works best if you kind of don't know what's going on and let it unfold in front of you. But I have to apologize. I don't remember which Kate suggested talking about this. So who wants to step up and take responsibility?
Twas I.
Oh, okay.
Who set
Kate
the house
Scotchless.
aflame. Yes.
Right,
but we're only going to talk about volume 1 and keep it spoiler free.
Or try.
But I did read the full 2 volumes. They're all on Hoopla now for those of you who abide. But it's so good. When Kate said she only read volume 1, I was like, how did you stop? That is crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, I ran out of time, is the answer.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah.
I also had trouble checking it out. Like I thought that I had it on Humble Bundle and that wasn't it. And then I tried to get on Hoopla and it wouldn't download, and so I ended up just
Hmm.
buying a digital copy of this. But I'm not mad about it.
Yeah. No.
Um,
I guess,
yeah.
to start the conversation, if you've not read it yet, The Nice House on the Lake came out, I think it started in 2021, maybe late that year. And, I was reading it month to month when it was coming out. It's a series from DC, kind of like a horror series. So not a superhero comic, but kind of like a horror suspense story written by James Tynion IV, art by Alvaro Martinez Bueno, and colors by Jordi Belair. And right off the gate, I say it's one of the best looking books I've read in recent memory. The
Yes.
artwork that Bueno does, it's painterly but kind of like sketchy, but also very realistic. It's a very distinct looking book, which fits the tone perfectly, I thought.
Yeah, it is beautiful, beautiful. It was interesting. I read the first one in physical
Okay.
from my library when it first was released in the trade paperback came out in 2022. Then I read volume 2 on Hoopla since my library doesn't have a copy yet of the physical.
Yeah.
And you know how with guided view it like zooms you in on things that weren't meant to be seen and like blown up.
Hmm. Hmm.
I did realize how much stuff is just like sketchy detail in the background versus like as distinct. You really don't realize it, but it made me appreciate the art so much more, in just how skilled that is to have so much of the kind of background or smaller frames actually not be that filled in, but
Right.
to not see that as the viewer. It really makes you focus on what they want you to focus on, with the view.
Hmm.
And because some parts of it are incredibly detailed and realistic, sometimes horrifyingly
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so I purposely turned off guided view. I was like, no, this is not a book for this.
Hmm.
But I will say one thing I loved reading on digital was it makes the colors absolutely pop. It's
Right.
one of those books
Yeah.
that's just gorgeous on the lit screen.
Hmm. That's something interesting because I feel like that's becoming more and more common. There's a lot of comics that if I buy physically, because that's kind of how I read most of my stuff,
Yeah.
certain books and certain colorists, I look at like, I kind of want to check this out digitally when I can, just to see how different it looks. Because if you're coloring things digitally, you have that in mind for the
Yeah.
digital like e-reading. So stuff can look a little bit muted on the page that really
Well,
pop on the screen,
especially DC, for whatever reason, didn't give them glossy pages in the trade paperbacks. They are
Right.
that matte pages, which
Yep.
I don't think does Jordi Belair's colors on this justice.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I have noticed that how many books I'm buying do have that sort of matte finish on the paper now. I don't know if that's a supply issue or just a conscious issue that they're doing, but it does make the colors read very, very differently. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like a like non there's a person that you see whose face does not look human at one point, and I am enchanted by how that was done, because like there's no like real form to it. There's no like outline. There's not really a shape, and yet like you can see the pieces of a face in it, like eyes, mouth,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But like it's not a head anymore.
It's
And
best described as a flesh tornado.
okay, yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But just like I feel like a lot of skill went into this, like trying to figure out how this is going to look, and then like it looks different every time you see it. Like you don't just see it
Right.
once, and like the fact that they could do that kind of look multiple times in multiple different ways is like,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
wow. I am delighted and enchanted and absolutely horrified by this, which is probably the goal.
Yeah, yeah, and the way I interpreted that is it's almost like that character is like almost like a higher dimensional being. It's like
Yeah.
our brains as the reader can't understand, or the other characters can't understand what they're looking at, so it just looks so like disturbing. Do you want someone to give like a quick elevator pitch so people know
Oh,
what we're actually talking about?
yeah, okay. So I did write a little bit of a synopsis. This
Yeah,
does there's like minor spoilers in this, I guess, like the first couple of
sure.
issues maybe, but I left off the end. So there's a lot of mystery here. So you should go and read it. Okay, so a man named Walter invites 11 of his closest friends to a nice house on a lake. Shocking. They are like writers, artists, reporters, and so on. They're very good in their fields. Soon, the guests see reports of a disaster in the world, and it appears everyone else has died. They all react in different ways, and they try to untangle the mystery of this house and this land. Why is it special? Why were they unharmed? They discover invisible walls around the lake, a doorless building, and many unusual, like, geometric statues. Everything they need is delivered to them mysteriously, and they occasionally glimpse Walter, who no longer looks human.
Right. So that's the character we're talking about that,
Yeah.
looks like a flesh tornado. And then when that reveal happens, it's still striking. Just again, as we said, the artwork is so lovely. So even if you know it's coming, like, it's still a striking image. And I think it's sold as a horror story, and I think it does have those elements of suspense and mystery, but it's a lot more complex than that. It's not, it's not like a gory, like, horror story about a monster or something. It's almost like psychological kind of horror. It's like
Yeah.
these people try to figure out why exactly they're saved and what's going on and the mystery of the house. And, it's a lot more complex than just being scary, I guess.
I would have, if I was to pitch this to someone, I would bill it as more of a sci-fi mystery than I would horror. But I definitely see where people get the horror elements, particularly the imagery of what's going on in the world outside of this enclosure.
Yeah.
And the flesh tornado. And one thing, in addition to the beauty of said flesh tornado and, like, how interesting it is that they make us, like, be able to even see his and understand his expression within that, like,
Mhm.
Yes.
weirdness. Is that Tinian somehow made me empathize with the flesh tornado, and which doesn't seem like it should be possible, but he did it, and that is just crazy. And this gets back to the whole thing with, like, Tom King of, like, they're so good at telling these stories where it isn't just black and white, and you can see things from multiple characters' points of view, and why one person sees something as horrifying and extremely unethical and wrong, and someone else thinks it's actually they're doing the right thing, and that conflict between those two characters, and you understand both sides, and there's not an easy clear cut yes or no, and then you're like, I need middle grade, this is too complicated. Like, give me the easy. But no, this is my favorite series by far of the last 2 years. It's incredible.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think what makes it so engaging is the fact that the stories, like, unfold as you go along. So it's like you can get the high concept. Like, we kind of told you what the high concept of the story is. It's a group of survivors, but they don't know what's going on, and you as a reader don't really get that sort of omniscient narrator telling you what's going on either. You're kind of uncovering it as they go along. There's a lot of weird things that happen on that island or on the house on the lake. There's a lot of strange circumstances. They're trying to wrap their brains around it. They're all very smart people with very different approaches to it, which I thought kind of made it work. They're not like, some of them had known each other in the past, but they're all related by knowing Walter individually. So it's like, why are we here? Why are we the ones? And that's what makes it the sort of mystery that unfolds.
It reminded me in a way of, like, the early seasons of Lost, where they're trying to understand why they're there, what the island is, what's behind it, kind of getting more of it, like, it's, and no surprise has a pull quote from one of the Lost people on the book, because that's definitely like, if you like that, check this book out for sure.
Yeah.
But I agree. I really like the storytelling, how it's told through every issue starts with a flash forward, but then we go to, like, present day, but we also have flashbacks where we're learning more about how Walter actually met and became friends with these different people, and why they were, or kind of the circumstances around their selection, if you will. And we learn more about who these people are, not in their actions in present day, which are telling, but are showing them in, like, obviously a very unique and stressful circumstance, but kind of who they were in the before times. So I don't think I've seen a book do this as well in comics, of having flashbacks, flash forwards, and present day without it being confusing and disorienting.
Right. Tinian is a very great writer, and I think not only he's able to do that, he also, like, manages a pretty big cast of characters. And there are times where I kind of, like, might lose track of who's who, but through the dialogue and through their actions, kind of easy to figure out, as you go through the story. But to have a story that is a mystery, but it's almost more character driven than a lot of mysteries you read, because the way the characters interact with each other, there are some characters that are like, this is great, we survived. This house gives us everything we need. That's maybe a minor spoiler. There's something where, like, oh, we can kind of live it up now. And other people are like, no, we have to find out what's going on. Everyone's coming out with a different angle. It's not just like a group of random people. You kind of get to know each character really well throughout the series.
It would have been really helpful for me to know that there was a glossary in the back of the book before I read it.
I was gonna say this. The number of characters is the reason that I don't think I could have read this single issue. That
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
really helpful to read them all together, to keep track of everyone, and also to have that glossary at the back that shows each character like artistically and then has a description.
Yeah. And then the fact that they're kind of labeled at the very beginning of the book as like the writer,
Mm-hmm.
the artist, the reporter, etc. They all have different
Mm-hmm.
professions, or different things that they are labeled as in any case. And like there are times when they are referred to in the book by those labels rather than their names. So you kind of have to remember
Mhm.
two things about each character, and then eventually you learn how they're connected to Walter, and remembering that is also helpful. So yeah, there's like a lot of information in this book. Like I don't think I did read this quickly, and I feel like I should have budgeted my time better and started earlier, and like um yeah, read this a little bit more slowly and like bookmarked the glossary.
One of the other standouts to me in this series is the architecture, like the interior design and
Mhm.
architecture work of this gorgeous mid-century modern house that this is set in on
Yeah.
that is the nice house on the lake, right? It
Mhm.
is so beautiful, and I think in so many ways like the absolute perfect setting for this, because one aspect of mid-century modern is all these huge windows and like walls of windows and lot to get lots of natural light,
Mhm.
and that works so like it's realistic just for the setting in the lake, like it is not out of place as one of these bazillionaires houses on a private lake like that. Many of them
Mhm.
are these fancy mid-century modern houses, but then also that becomes that aesthetic of all the glass windows and kind of mirrors and stuff, and then all the kind of stark cold clean lines of the furniture and stuff like that,
Mhm.
really adds to the story in interesting ways that um, play into kind of more and more what's going on, and um, as they sort of figure out what they're doing here and why. And I thought that was a really interesting choice.
Yeah.
And also just really liked looking at it. So pretty.
Again, you cannot oversell what a nice looking book this is. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those books like, I have all the single issues. I should go back and read it as a go, maybe digitally, but having a nice oversized hardcover would be really
Hmm.
nice at some point. Just telling you,
I
DC.
was
I think
hoping that too. So now we have the first two volumes. This is an ongoing series. So the first two volumes are the first cycle of the book.
yeah,
And I'm hoping that DC gives us a nice hardcover of the first 12 issues.
yeah.
Because I was debating buying the paperbacks, but the paperbacks are $20 a piece for this non-glossy paper. I would gladly pay more for a hardcover with better print quality
For
if
sure.
they give it to us. Of course,
For sure.
knowing DC, they'll be like, give us $75. And we're like,
Okay.
fine.
It is that good though. And I'm glad you mentioned the
Yeah.
architecture, because that is something like, if you sell it as a horror story, it's in your mind, you maybe think of like, maybe it's like this gothic, like haunted house. No, it's this beautiful, like glass house, like on this gorgeous lake. And it's like, there's nothing really like dark or scary about it physically. It's the psychological aspect of the story is dark and scary, but the actual place they're in is like, it's beautiful. And,
Yeah.
it does kind of remind me, very tangentially, but it does kind of remind me of Glass Onion in that sense, where it's like, all right, all these random people are together. There's a mystery someone's trying to figure out. Why are they all there? Obviously, Glass Onion is more comedic take on that, but this is kind of the more serious, dramatic take. But yeah, you're making me want to go back and reread it, because again, reading it month to month was such a different experience. And it's weird. I really love reading monthly comics because a good writer and a good artist will like hit the beats perfectly. Like an issue will end. It's like, well, shit, I cannot wait another month for that. But like, kind of like,
Yeah.
I like that experience. Like, damn, that was so good. And then it makes you excited to get the next issue,
Yeah.
as and like, it's a different, it's a double-edged sword. Cause like, yeah, it was like, all right, that was such a good 22 pages of story. Makes me excited. A big cliffhanger, but I got to wait a month, so it's I kind of like that dynamic. And I think Tinian's a good writer, and like, he's very good at hitting those moments exactly where they need to be in the story to keep you engaged month to month.
It is only $3.99 on Kindle right now if you want the digital like to own and have and keep.
There you go. There you go.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Is the Humble Bundle still going that has it, Kate, or was that from?
I don't think it was on Humble Bundle at all.
Oh, okay. I thought you mentioned Humble Bundle. I'm sorry.
I thought that this was an Image book, not a DC book, and I've bought like four or
Mhm.
five Image Humble Bundles, so I was
It
like,
reads
maybe.
like an
Gotcha.
Image book.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
100% does.
Mhm.
It's the DC Black Label, which I know nothing about. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
something that you're more familiar with, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, well, that might be a topic for another episode at some point, but the Black Label was
Unpack that.
initially it eventually became sort of a thing where like, these are the stories that they're out of continuity stories. We can do a little bit darker stories. They can do non-superhero stuff. It didn't start out that way, and that's again a topic for another time, but the fact that it is sort of a horror comic, and I think there was a period where DC was trying to branch out a little bit and kind of do non-superhero stuff. And Tinian was a writer that had pretty long history with DC writing Batman. So I mean, it's pretty well established there. Kind of gave him carte blanche to do this type of story. I like it when big two publishers do stuff like this. To do stuff that's outside of the big universe. And do something a little uncommon. I don't think they sell that well, which is why you don't see many of them. But I think it's a good example of one that landed because it gets rave reviews. Everyone that's read this book has been praising it. We've praised it on the show in the past. We're doing an episode right now talking about it. So yeah, if you've not checked it out yet, what are you waiting for? Get on it. Yeah, so that's Nice House on the Lake. Is there anything else you've read recently, since this is kind of a free form, no topic episode? Anything else you want to highlight for the listeners there that you'd recommend?
I accidentally read another DC book. I know this is
Oh
like all
no.
so
What?
outside the lines for me. This past 2 weeks have just been really weird of all these
Uh-huh.
accidental DC grabs. So the new comics shelf at my local library had Far Sector by N.K.
Ooh,
Jemisin, which I had not
nice.
heard of. I just saw N.K. Jemisin and went, oh, cool. And it wasn't until I got home that I realized that this is a DC book for Green Lantern with Jamal
Mhm.
Campbell illustrating. It is gorgeous. Again,
Yeah.
like the art is fantastic. And we do get the glossy pages in this. The trade has all 12 issues. And so I accidentally jumped into a Green Lantern story, but it is done so well because I would absolutely recommend this to other non-Green Lantern readers because you really
Mhm.
don't need to know much about them other than they have these magic rings, but even then the story tells you that. Like it's very much a book made for non-Green Lantern readers,
Right.
and self-contained, where a newly chosen Green Lantern named Joe Mullen is sent to the city Enduring, which is this kind of human constructed planet out in space. It's a massive metropolis of like 20 billion people. And they've maintained peace for over 500 years by genetically removing the ability of their citizens to have any emotions. And
Mhm.
if you don't have emotions, you make logical decisions, like not breaking the law, apparently, which is a leap, I think, because it turns out it's very logical. Like the whole saying that crime doesn't pay, uh, not true. Crime pays well. That's why people do it. It just doesn't pay if you get caught. Uh,
Right. Right.
so, um, like, yeah. But anyway, that premise aside, like she's sent there to help with this as they have their first murder in like 500 years, and everyone's like, "What's going on?"
Mhm.
And it soon comes out that there is this street drug that essentially overrides this genetic block on emotions, and people are quote unquote like getting high by taking this and feeling emotions for the first time. And it goes on to be, it's a 12 issue detective mystery series, so I don't want to go too down into the plot because you want to go in cold, but it is very much, it reads to me more like a Batman story in that sense of like the Batman that
Sure.
I've read was the old Scott Snyder like New 52 books, and
Mhm. Mhm.
it reads very much to me like the Court of Owls, where it's like each issue you're getting more into, like they're going to talk to now this section of people and this, they're going over here to get more info from this. It is very interesting in that sense. It gets into the politics between the three species that all inhabit this metropolis, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of parallels made and flashbacks to her time on Earth as a police officer, and
Right.
the use of guns and lethal force on Earth in terms of law enforcement, and
Mhm.
what is happening here paralleled with like discrimination and bias on Earth. I thought it was done in such a good way that it's not particularly heavy-handed. It doesn't like detract from the story. Like you don't end up feeling like you're reading a moral parable tale versus like a DC comic. You're still definitely reading a superhero comic with lots of action and fun and cool stuff, but it has more of kind of a point to it, I guess, is like you don't also feel like you're eating like the cotton candy of reads that's like just fun and nothing to it.
For sure.
But sugar. So I really enjoyed it. Have you guys read this one?
Yes, I raved about this on the show when I was reading it. So I was reading it again month to month when it was coming out. One of my favorite books that particular year. And I think we may have stumbled upon the unintentional theme of this episode, Kait. You are coming out as a DC fan. It's happening.
Happy Pride Month.
Exactly. No, I mean, this book, again, like Nice House on the Lake, is a book that you don't have to know anything about the DC universe to pick up. You know, you didn't even know it was a Green Lantern story until you started reading it. And even then, it's they tell you everything you know about the Green Lanterns in that book. You don't need to know anything about Hal Jordan or anybody else. And it's a book that's, you know, on the surface, it's a superhero book because it's Green Lanterns. But again, as you said, it's a sci-fi story. You know, it's a mystery story. And like all sort of good science fiction, it's a reflection of our time. When you get to the points when they're talking about police brutality and excessive force, you know, I'm reading that, and when it's coming out in the year 2020, it's like, this is hitting right now what's happening. This is not about the future. It's about right now. It's a fantastic book. And a nice parallel to Nice House on the Lake. I remember buying this issue to issue, month to month, physically, and thinking, I bet these colors pop so much harder digitally because it's such a beautifully colored book.
Yeah, I don't know. I did read this in the physical copy from my library, but were nice glossy pages, which I assume the comic was too. I bet you're right that this would be a really nice book on digital.
So that's interesting. I'm glad you picked these two books. I mean, they're books that I absolutely adored, and I think if you've not checked them out yet, if you're listening to the show, you're getting the highest possible recommendation. Someone who doesn't even like DC comics is telling you to buy these DC comics.
It's true.
So, and as someone who is a lifelong DC fan, I think they're great too. So they appeal to both audiences. So, I don't know. I think I'm glad we stumbled upon an unintentional theme for this episode. I don't know, Kait. Lanfear, anything else you wanted to add? Have you said you'd not read Far Sector yet, correct?
I have not read Far Sector yet. You're definitely convincing me to read it. It has been on my to-read list for a while, but I think it moved up.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like I'm just a dumb guy that reads comics, and hearing other people who have read other N.K. Jemisin stuff, they adore their work. So, you know, the sci-fi novels that they have written are just as great. I'm like, cool. Yep. If there's no pictures, I might be a tough sell, but I have recommended this comic to people who have read their other works. So I think if you like sci-fi in any capacity, you can enjoy this book. Yeah. Well, cool. I think we've stumbled upon a theme. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Unless anyone has any final thoughts. Okay, I guess that means we're all going to take off now and go read some comics. Maybe go to the beach, read some comics. That's always fun. Enjoy the nice weather here in the summer. I want to say that we'll be back next week. I'll be back in the host chair again. Michael, I'll still be in the Savage Land, I'm assuming, but I'll be joined by Brian and Paloma. And we're going to be talking about blockbuster comic movies. Not the movies themselves, but the adaptations. So we'll be picking some comic adaptations of blockbuster films to talk about since it's blockbuster movie season here in the summer. If you enjoy the show, of course, you can find us all over on social media at IRCB Podcast. That's Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, Goodreads, YouTube. We've got a YouTube page. You can listen to full shows over there. All over the internet at IRCB Podcasts, including Patreon. You can support us on Patreon to get exclusive audio shows like Better Batmobile that I host, and the Movie Club that I also host, I guess, and other stuff that I'm not on. That is at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast. Infinity Shred are the best band in the known universe, and they do all of the music for our shows. Zander is the name that strikes fear into the hearts of evildoers everywhere. Thank you, Kait. Thank you, Kait. Thank you, Danny, for proof listening. Thank you for listening. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.